I'm 84 years old, and let me tell you something I wish someone had told me much earlier. There is a difference between being loved and being included. For a long time, I thought if my children loved me, they would naturally make space for me in their lives. I thought love would remember. I thought love would call. I thought love would notice silence. But age has a cruel way of teaching you what words really mean. And one of the hardest lessons I have ever learned is this: your children can love you very much and still leave you lonely. They can mean well and still forget you. They can cry at your funeral one day and still not call you on a Tuesday when you are sitting alone with soup on the stove and no one to talk to. That is not a lesson anyone prepares you for. People warn you about illness. They warn you about losing your strength. They warn you about widowhood. But no one warns you about the quiet humiliation of becoming emotionally optional to the people you once built your whole life around. And that is what this video is about. Not anger, not revenge, not teaching your children a lesson. This is about what happens when you keep reaching for people who only remember you when it is convenient. This is about what begging does to the soul. And this is about what I did when I finally understood that if I kept asking for scraps of attention, I was going to lose something far more valuable than their time. I was going to lose myself. Now let me go back, because these things never begin in one big moment. They begin quietly. They begin with one missed call, one "I'm sorry, it's been busy," one visit postponed, one message answered 3 hours later with just enough kindness to stop you from complaining and just enough distance to leave you aching. That is how it happened for me. My youngest son lives about 40 minutes away, close enough to visit, close enough to remember, close enough to stop by. And yet, there were weeks when I saw strangers more often than I saw him. My daughter lives farther away, in another state, and over time I stopped thinking of that as geography. It began to feel like a decision, not a cruel one. That is what makes it so complicated. Most children do not wake up and decide to wound their parents. They simply begin organizing their lives around things that feel more urgent: work, children, schedules, problems, exhaustion, their own marriages, their own disappointments. And slowly, the parent who was once the center of everything becomes background, not unloved, background. And let me tell you something, being background in your children's life hurts in a very particular way, because they are not rejecting you openly. If they rejected you openly, at least you would know where you stood. No. They do something harder to fight. They keep you in the soft corner, the later corner, the "I'll call next week" corner, the "we should really get together soon" corner, and an older mother can spend years dying inside that corner if she is not careful. I nearly did. I remember one Wednesday very clearly, not because something dramatic happened, because something ordinary finally broke the illusion. I had made soup, real soup, the kind that takes time, the kind that fills the kitchen with memory. Chicken, vegetables, herbs, broth slowly deepening on the stove. My knees hurt, my back was talking the whole time, but I felt useful. I felt like myself, and I thought, I'll call my son. I'll tell him to come by. That is what mothers do, isn't it? When we make something good, we want to share it. When life gives us one warm thing, we still want to place it in our children's hands. So I called. No answer. I left a message, just a light one. I know how to sound light. Women of my generation were trained in that art. I did not say, "I haven't seen you in weeks." I did not say, "Your father has been gone for years, and some afternoons I do not hear another human voice." I did not say, I am lonelier than I know how to admit. I said, I made soup. Come if you want. He texted back hours later, crazy week, Mom. Next time. Next time. 2 small words, perfectly polite, and somehow completely empty. I sat there looking at that message for a long time. Then I put my phone face down and ate my soup alone. It was still good, and I made myself notice that mattered, because that was the day I stopped asking whether my children loved me and started asking a far more painful question. Why am I handing them so much power over whether my day feels human? That question changed everything. I had cried plenty before that, in bathrooms, in the kitchen after dark, in bed without making sound. I cried after my husband died. I cried because a house built for 2 people becomes unbearable when only one is left inside it. I cried because grief makes even familiar furniture feel strange. I cried because after decades of being needed, I did not know what to do with the silence. But that Wednesday, I did not cry. I became clear, and clarity, I have learned, is sometimes colder than grief, but far more useful. Now I want to be careful here, because when older people say, my children ignore me, that phrase can hide the truth instead of revealing it. My children did not ignore me like strangers ignore a stranger. They ignored me the way people ignore something that is still there and not yet urgent, like a creaking step, like a dripping tap, like a letter on the table they mean to open later. I was still loved. I believe that. If I fell ill, they would come. If I were in a hospital bed, they would cry. If I died, they would grieve sincerely. That is the terrible part. The love is real. It is just terribly timed. It arrives at emergencies, at funerals, at crises, at major holidays. But the ordinary Tuesdays, the long afternoons, the small ache of wanting to matter in someone's everyday life, that is where many old parents are left alone. And if you are watching me right now, I think perhaps you know exactly what I mean. Maybe you tell yourself not to expect too much. Maybe you tell yourself everyone is busy now. Maybe you have become very skilled at saying, I'm fine. I was too. I became excellent at being easy. I stopped mentioning things that were hard. I stopped talking about the steps to the front door. I stopped mentioning repairs around the house. I stopped asking for visits unless I was prepared to hear an apology and a reschedule. I became the kind of mother who said, don't worry about me, so often that eventually people believed me. But there is a cost to making yourself easy to carry, and no one talks about that cost. So I will. When you shrink yourself enough times to avoid being a burden, you eventually disappear, not to them, to yourself. You stop feeling like a person and start feeling like a role. The mother, the widow, the old woman on the street with careful needs and lowered expectations. I could feel myself becoming that. And I refused. Not at 84, not after all I had survived. My husband used to say something I did not fully understand until after he died. He used to say, the only thing worse than being lonely is being lonely while people think you shouldn't be. At the time, I thought he was just being thoughtful. Later, I realized he was telling the truth, because that is what many older parents become, loved and alone, remembered and neglected, important in principle, but not in practice. And that combination will break your heart if you do not learn how to protect yourself from it. So I stopped, not loving, stopping the begging. That is the important difference. And yes, I use that word deliberately. Begging does not always sound desperate. Sometimes it sounds like just checking in. No rush, only if you're free. Don't worry if not, whenever you have a minute. On the surface, these are harmless little phrases, but underneath them can live something humiliating. Please remember me. Please choose me. Please prove I still matter. That is what I had been doing. Not because I was weak, because I was lonely. But loneliness does not make begging noble. It only makes it understandable. And understandable things can still destroy your dignity if repeated often enough. So the first thing I did was simple. I put my phone away. Not forever. I am old. Not dramatic. But I stopped organizing my emotional life around whether it rang. I stopped checking it every hour. I stopped treating silence like a medical diagnosis, because that is what I had been doing. Every hour without a message felt like proof. Every evening without a call felt like rejection. The phone had become a machine for measuring my own unwantedness, and I was the one feeding coins into it. Once I saw that, I could not unsee it. So I put it in a drawer, not to punish them, to interrupt myself, to break the ritual of hope before hope became another word for self-erasure. That first week was harder than I expected. My hands reached for the phone automatically. At certain hours, especially late afternoon, I felt almost panicked. What if they call? What if they need me? What if this is the day? But underneath that panic was something even more revealing. I had built my daily emotional structure around absence, around maybe, around waiting. And when I removed the phone, I realized how little of my day had actually belonged to me. That realization frightened me, so I did something else. I bought a little spiral notebook, yellow cover, nothing beautiful, nothing dramatic. And every evening I wrote down one thing I had done that day. Not felt, done. That distinction matters, because feelings had become too slippery, too dependent on other people. But actions were mine, made soup, watered the plant, read 4 chapters, sat in the garden, took out the winter blankets, watched a bird build something in the oak tree. Tiny things, ordinary things. But they were evidence that I was still a living person with days of my own, not simply someone things happened to. That notebook became a mirror, and what it showed me was surprising. I had not vanished. I had only stopped witnessing myself. Now here is where the story changes, because I could have stayed in my own little world after that, quietly dignified, quietly lonely. And many older people do exactly that. They stop chasing their children, yes, but then they retreat from life itself. That is not freedom. That is just a different shape of loss. So I made myself do something I had not done in too long. I went for a walk. I live on the same street I have lived on for more than 3 decades. Houses change, families change, trees grow taller, people move in and out, but the street remembers. And for months, maybe years, I had been walking less and less. Loneliness makes your world smaller if you let it. Grief does too. But that day, I walked, and a few houses down, I saw my neighbor, a younger woman, divorced, I later learned, a little girl, a tired face, the kind of tired that sits in the bones, not the eyes. She was sitting on her front steps, looking like a woman who had put everything down for just 1 minute because she could not carry it all another second. I should have kept walking. That would have been the polite thing. Instead, I sat down beside her. I said, "You look like someone who could use 5 minutes of not being asked anything." She stared at me, then she laughed in the saddest way and said, "That may be the kindest thing anyone has said to me in months." We sat there quietly for a while. Then she started talking about the divorce, about the child, about work, about being tired in a way sleep does not fix, about feeling like she was holding up an entire life with both hands while everyone around her behaved as if it were holding itself. I knew that look. I had worn it when my own children were young. I knew what it meant to keep going after you had already emptied out. And something shifted in me that afternoon. For months, I had been staring in one direction only, toward my children, toward their distance, toward their silence. I had forgotten that other people existed, other griefs, other needs, other lonely hearts, other unfinished conversations. And there, on those front steps, I remembered something. A person does not stop being useful because their children stop calling. A person does not stop being needed because the old family role has faded. A person can still matter in new directions. That insight saved me more than any phone call ever could have. Her little girl started coming by sometimes after school. We baked cookies, we read books. She asked me blunt child questions about my age and my hands and why tea tastes better in small cups. I laughed again. Do you know how shocking laughter can feel after prolonged loneliness? It almost hurts the first time. Her mother started coming in for tea sometimes too. She would sit in my kitchen with the exhaustion still on her shoulders, and we would talk. Not always about deep things, sometimes just about groceries and school shoes and the rain, but even that mattered, because the loneliness began to loosen, not because my children changed, because I changed. That is the point I want to drive deep into your heart if I can. The answer to being ignored is not always to be pursued harder. Sometimes the answer is to re-enter life somewhere else, not as punishment, as rescue, and that is what I did. I did not become cold. I did not decide I no longer needed anyone. I did not turn bitter and start giving speeches about ungrateful children. No, I became more alive in my own life. And do you know what happened after that? I sounded different. When my children did call, I did not cling. I did not pour out months of stored-up hurt all at once. I did not try to use guilt as glue. I was simply there, steady, whole, occupied, still loving, but no longer starving. That changes everything. Children can hear the difference between love and need, between warmth and emotional hunger, between a mother who has a life and a mother waiting by the window. And when I stopped waiting by the window, something in all of us became easier. Now let me be honest again. This is not a magic trick. I am not promising that if you stop begging, your children will suddenly become saints. Some will not change much. Some will remain inconsistent. Some will love you sincerely and still disappoint you regularly. That is human life. But even if they do not change, you still must, because the alternative is too costly. If you keep begging for closeness that only comes in crumbs, you train your own heart to live on crumbs. And you deserve better than that. At 84, I believe this more than ever. Dignity is not pride. Dignity is not hardness. Dignity is knowing that your love can remain open without your self-respect being sacrificed beside it. So, what should you do if your children ignore you? First, stop measuring your worth by how often they call. Second, interrupt the habit of waiting. Third, witness your own days. Fourth, go back into the world, even if only one small step at a time. Fifth, become useful somewhere life can still answer you. And above all, do not confuse chasing with love. They are not the same thing. Love says, I am here. Begging says, please choose me. Love stands. Begging kneels. And old age is far too sacred a season to spend kneeling at doors that only open when convenient. I'm 84 years old. I still love my children. That never changed. But I do not build my days around their inconsistency anymore. My phone still sits on the table. Sometimes it rings. Sometimes it doesn't. But it no longer tells me who I am. That is the freedom I want for you. Not bitterness, not revenge. Freedom. So if your children ignore you, do not beg. Go live. Cook the soup anyway. Read the book. Water the plant. Take the walk, sit on the steps, answer someone else's loneliness, write down what you did today. Make a life that does not collapse every time the phone stays silent, because if they come back, let them find you living, not waiting.